What hair?
My guest is Jeff Lowenfels, author of the 4-book series Teaming with Microbes, Teaming with Nutrients, Teaming with Fungi, and Teaming with Bacteria, which is all about the soil food web, the living world beneath our feet, which could make all the difference in our gardening and our farming, our food production, and our health, not to mention our water quality. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm great. Couldn't be better, and great to be here.
So you're in Alaska, right? What's it like in Alaska today?
Well, today we have a rare sunny day, and it's going to be above freezing, which is for the winter, a little bit rare. So we're kind of excited about it.
And Jeff, what motivated you to write this series of books?
What motivated me to write this series of books? You know, it's a question people ask, and I never anticipate. When I discovered what the soil food web was all about, it was as a result of teachings from Dr. Elaine Ingham, a noted professor around the world. She's really quite something, and she's the guru of the soil food web. And when I learned about the soil food web, I asked her why everybody in the world, particularly gardeners, don't understand the soil food web. And she said there's just too hard to get traction. And I said, I can write you a book. So I wrote a book, and I've been pushing the soil food web ever since. And it really is a beautiful system that people will adopt if they haven't already.
Right. So, Jeff, what have been some of the big developments in soil science in recent years?
Sure. Well, I think you have to start with the soil food web itself. Before 2000 or so, nobody talked about bacteria and fungi and things in the soil. Maybe I should give a little quick definition of what the soil food web is. Everybody knows there are soil food chains where the little guy gets eaten by the bigger guy, gets eaten by the bigger guy. There are lots of those chains in the soil. And every now and then something on one of the chains looks up, sees something on another chain and says, I can eat that, and does so, and connects the two chains. And eventually you end up with a web, essentially, of who eats whom in the soil. And the reason why this is important is because the way plants operate in nature is they use almost half, or maybe even a little more, of their photosynthetic energy to produce things that are called exudates that drip out of the root system and attract bacteria and fungi. The bacteria and fungi take the carbon out of these exudates, and they in turn attract protozoa and nematodes, eat the bacteria and fungi, poop out the excess that they don't need, and that turns out to have an electrical charge on it, plant nutrients in plant usable form. And so that's how plants get their nutrients in nature. Well, we need to be doing that same thing, or at least not disrupting that process as we garden and as we grow food for agriculture.
Jeff, when gardeners and farmers don't understand the soil food web, what are they missing?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example and tie it in with that last answer, because one of the greatest new things that's been discovered about the soil food web is a process known as rhizophagy, whereby plants, some of those bacteria that are attracted to the root system by those exudates are not eaten, but instead are attracted to go inside the very newest plant root cells. And once they're inside there, we can talk about it later on, but the net effect is they produce nitrogen inside the plant. They fix nitrogen inside the root. Well, if you're not cognizant of the soil food web, you don't understand that up to 40% of your nitrogen could be coming from these bacteria, and you're probably not treating the soil in a way that respects them so that they can give you that free nitrogen. So there are lots of new things that are being discovered, and when you layer them on top of the Dr. Elaine Ingham soil food web process, you begin to discover that we got to change the way we grow things, or we're not going to be able to take advantage and team with these microbes that feed the plant.
So what do people normally do that is harmful to the soil structure and the soil food web?
Well, the first thing they do is they use chemical fertilizers, really, really destructive to the soil food web for a couple of reasons. Not necessarily that they kill the microbes, but some of them do because they're salts and they blow them apart, but they change the population that's naturally there. They cause the plant to say, gee, I'm getting free nitrogen. Why do I need to produce so many exudates to attract these microbes? Well, once you don't have the attraction of the microbes, and once you lose those microbes, you end up with losing soil structure because those microbes glue together soil, weave together the soil, make burrows in the soil that act as reservoirs for organic material and water and air. And so once you start using chemicals, they go away. We rototill. Rototilling disturbs that great fungal network that everybody likes to think about that feeds these plants. It puts the bacteria that are supposed to be in the root zone in a different location. And when you cut a worm in half, you don't get two worms unless you hit it right at the 18th segment. So yeah, you get two halves of a dead worm. So these are all
what you just described.
Yeah.
That doesn't that deliver nutrients to the plant, the
Yes.
soil food web?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the bottom line: is that these bacteria and protozoa fungi that get eaten and pooped out are the nutrients that plants use. These bacteria that go into the plant, these rhizophagy bacteria, produce nitrogen that the plant uses. There's a fungi called mycorrhizal fungi that is attracted by the plant just as these bacteria are, the rhizophagy bacteria, and they go in and they in return for those exudates, they bring the plant water and nitrogen and phosphorus and all the metallic nutrients. And so these are all the way the plants operate. In the end of all of my lectures, I always say, who fertilizes the redwoods with Miracle-Gro? Nobody. It doesn't need it because it uses these tiny little microbes. It's teamed with them to feed the plant. So that's what we should be doing as gardeners.
So this mycelial network, correct me if I'm wrong on this is my understanding, this mycelial network, which exists if you don't tear it up with tillage and chemical fertilizers,
right?
It's a kind of a broker for nutrients and water and distress signals.
Well, and other things as well. Yes, it does all of those things. It also supports a system of bacterial life that can hop off the fungi and help fix phosphorus, so that it's usable, produce, as do the fungi themselves, metabolites that act as antibiotics or tractants. So there are all sorts of things that these guys can do. They may host bacteria that cleate minerals in the soil that either the plant wants or the plant wants to keep out. And so there's all sorts of neat things that they do. The bacteria and the fungi operate together. There is this network of fungal hyphae that exists. That's what partly gives the soil structure. There's a great deal of controversy now over something that for a little while was extremely popular and now is still popular, but getting less so. And that's this idea that there's a worldwide wood web, where you've got this fungal network throughout the system, and it's feeding the trees and it's feeding all the different plants, and everybody's Walt Disney happy. And that hasn't really been proven the way that the popular press has picked it up. There's some sharing, but so far we haven't been able to really see papers that definitely prove there's this great feeding frenzy going on.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I think I learned from your book, Teaming with Microbes, and that is, bacteria have a certain amount of nitrogen in them, and then the bacteria get consumed by the protozoa, and the bacteria have a high ratio of nitrogen, but then the protozoa eats it and has to excrete some of that nitrogen, and that gives nitrogen to the plants, right?
Right, exactly. And what happens is there's like us, organisms only eat what they need. If there's extra, they don't eat it. And then they process it and they get rid of some of the stuff. So it's freeing up that nitrogen, and it's freeing it up in a way that puts an electrical charge on it. If you read Teeming with Nutrients, which is the second book I wrote, really should be in many ways the last one you should read. I would start with Teeming with Microbes, move to Teeming with Bacteria, then Teeming with Fungi, and then I would do Nutrients. But the concept in Teeming with Nutrients is that there are these little tunnels in each cell through which nutrients go, and each tunnel only handles one nutrient. So nitrogen only goes through one kind of tunnel. There may be many of them, but it's only one kind of tunnel, and it's got to have an electrical charge in order to get through that tunnel. So that's what happens when it gets eaten and pooped out.
So if you team with microbes, using your
Yes.
terminology, teaming with microbes, fungi, nutrients, protozoa,
Right.
what's the bacteria?
Bacteria.
If you team with microbes, does that make your work easier as a gardener or a farmer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to make sure everybody understands. I spell it TEAM, not TEM, and it absolutely does. Again, imagine if you were able to grow a redwood in your backyard, never having to feed it anything. Maybe putting a little mulch. Actually, you don't even have to do that, because the redwood grows based upon a concept, which is something we also need to follow, which is the law of return. What falls down from a plant is supposed to. It's supposed to decay, go back into the soil, and feed the plant. So what do we do as gardeners? We take the melon, we get the corn, we strip off the fruits, and they are not returned back into the soil. So there's something missing. We either have to replace that with chemical fertilizers, or we can create microbe foods where the microbes can break it down and eat it and create this wonderful system that we've been talking about. So that's what organic gardeners do. They put back, when they break the law of return, they pay the fine, and they pay the fine using organic material.
So the law of return, they remind me the name of the author Sir Albert Howard.
Well, was it Howard? It was the gentleman who basically, I think it was. Yeah, it was. And he invented the nitrogen fertilizer concept. We were running out of guano around the world. We didn't have it in places like where you lived. They'd plant a crop of cotton, it'd grow great, it'd denutrify the soil like crazy, and they had to go find new soil, or get an awful lot of fish, which was too hard to do. So I'm pretty sure it was Howard, law of return. And
so you brought some slides. You want to show those to us?
Well, there are some pretty interesting stuff. Let me see if I can figure out how we do this. I got to share the screen. Let's see. I guess we'll go to this one and we'll share that. Does that show up there? I think it does. Okay, let me move that out of the way. So this is the soil food web. And of course, you've got the sun, photosynthesis, attracting the fungi and the bacteria. Some of them are eaten, and some of them, mycorrhizal fungi, making a symbiotic relationship. And these bacteria form an endophytic relationship. In other words, they move into the plant. And this is what a cell looks like. These are the various tunnels. This is the big air vacuole in the middle of the cell. And so this would take nitrogen, and this would take, you can see the nitrogen, there's phosphorus, sucrose gets in, this kind of, so all these things move in different ways, and they go out different ways as well. What I find interesting is this is what the exudate, when I first started writing, this is what exudate looked like. Root, exudate, here, root, oh my God, root hairs. These are exudates and a little bit of slough material. And these are all sorts of microbes that are being attracted to it, which I just love. The concept of a Bacteria, is something that gardeners need to be thinking about. I think we've adjusted to the idea that fungal are good, mycorrhizal fungi are useful. 90% of the plants use them. You can find mycorrhizal fungi for sale at nurseries. Gardeners and farmers are using mycorrhizal fungi, and we know they're important. Bacteria is just, coming into its own, and we tend to think of a bacteria this way. No. You don't think ever a single bacteria. This is the tip of a pin. And this is the bacteria on the tip of a pin. People should be thinking of bacteria this way. Not one car in a garage, but gazillions of them, because they're never one. And the reason is because they multiply, every 20 minutes. Here's your tongue. They're really small. So this is a single cell in your tongue. And I see you're feeling your tongue right now. And these are all the bacteria on a single cell. Some of them are really, really beautiful, but they're really, really small. So here's a mite with a bunch of little teeny bacteria on them. And once they get into the plant, which they do, these are the bacteria being attracted by, remember this picture here, remember this part here, and then they get attracted to that stuff. And they move into the cells. And if you look carefully here, you'll see in these root hairs that there are individual bacteria. It's really kind of a neat thing. What people should be thinking about is a tofu thing. So this is the cell wall of the root, and the bacteria moves into that and gets into that, what would be in the tofu thing, a water dish, the water. This is the inside of the cell, and they multiply and circulate in this area right here. And so this is what they begin to look like in the cell. They're circulating around here. You can see each into, nobody used to be, Dr. Lane wasn't able to see these because we didn't have the kind of microscopy available. And so here they are. Look at this inside the cell, these bacteria, which is sort of fascinating. And they do all sorts of kind of neat things. The plant produces what's known as a reactive oxygen series in order to protect itself from these bacteria. It doesn't want to get taken over. So it's called ROS. It's what causes sunburn, and I found ROS with a sunburn. And that ROS ends up stripping off the bacteria cell wall, which feeds the bacteria. The bacteria fights back by producing ethylene, which causes the cell to stretch and provides a little teeny bit of carbon, literally, to the bacteria itself. And then they also produce the nitrogen. And they produce the nitrogen in order to weaken that ROS. And so there's this little trap system where the bacteria are trapped in there. In order to get carbon, they have to produce the ethylene. The superoxide is produced, which causes them to produce nitrogen. And there's this kind of neat little thing. And the plant eats all of this stuff and has a great time. But these bacteria get circulated around. They get circulated around in that little water area in my example, and they begin to multiply. And so here's what they begin to look like. And they form these little structures as they multiply. And again, they're being circulated like crazy, and they begin to multiply more and more and more. And eventually what happens is they back up against the cell wall. And they're continually producing that ethylene, which causes the cell wall in that area to stretch. So it forms, this would be the cell, this would be that area that's stretching. Each individual hair is formed. These are individual root hairs. They're formed by the bacteria that are inside the individual root cells. So this is all part of one big cell that's right there. And look,
so the bacteria form the cell, the root hair?
Right. They're still in that same cell. They cause the tube to form off the cell, connected to the cell, and they're in the root hair. So here's some great, and what happens is they begin to accumulate here because they're multiplying. And eventually what happens is they begin to accumulate, they get pushed by the plant cell out into the soil. You see all these little blue spots? That's because there have been explosions, literally, of these guys getting blown out into the soil. And once they're in the soil, they regrow their cell wall, they renutrify, And a few days later, they go back into a new meristem cell and repeat the trip again. So these are these little quads that are formed. They've been blown out here. You can have a root that'll blow them out 5 or 6 times as it's growing, the root hair. Now, you and I were brought up to believe that root hairs were for bringing in nutrients. No, root hairs are for making sure these bacteria get back out into new soil where they can regrow their cell hairs and be available to come back in again.
Wow.
They happen to be very thin-walled. And because they're so thin-walled, they take in nutrients easily. And because they've got all that big surface area, there's a lot of that thin wall. And so they end up taking in nutrients. Now, I'm being theological. What came first, bringing in the nutrients or taking care of the, I don't know. But it's fascinating because it changes the old 2006 soil food web concept of the exudates, like the root is a farmer. It puts the exudates out. That's the seed. Things grow, and then it harvests and brings it in. It's now a rancher as well. It brings in these bacteria. It shears off the wool. It eats a little bit of, maybe a lamb chop or two. It puts everything except for the poor guy that doesn't have any legs anymore back out into the paddock. Gets more wool, brings it back in again. I mean, it's really kind of
do the bacteria consent to this, or do they get sucked into it?
Oddly enough, the bacteria are attracted by a signal from the plant. I'm trying to find a cell that kind of depicts this. What happens is these bacteria, as they grow in that area, form this slime, and so they live in this slime. And when they're in that slime, they're competing for food. I'm trying to find the picture of the slime. Yeah, there it is. So they're in there and they got this slime and they're competing for food. And they smell this popcorn smell, butyric acid. And it causes them to break out of the slime and break into where the smell is coming from, the root. And it ends up in that periplasmic space. And so it is attracted and moves there voluntarily, and then you have this unbelievable system operating. Wow. Now, you got to think about this. A plant lets a bacteria live inside it. That's got to have developed over a long period of time. So this rhizophagy has been going on for a long, long time. It was discovered in 2010 by a group in Australia. They ran out of funding, and a gentleman named Dr. James White has become the Dr. Elaine Ingham of rhizophagy. So between Dr. Ingham and Dr. White, we're getting an unbelievable picture. Wow. And it makes sense, of course, that this happens. The plant, because it can't run around and do things like we can, has developed various systems to get its nutrients. So, for example, legumes form rhizobia. They take the rhizobia and form those nodules. Okay, well, this so the bottom line is you've got to have a healthy microbial population in order to be able to support all these things we've been talking about today. And you've got to operate in a way that feeds the microbes, doesn't fertilize the plant. The microbes fertilize the plant. You feed the microbes, and that requires that you use things that support or contain microbes. So compost has all the microbes you could possibly want. My goodness gracious! But the seed of the plant contains microbes too. So don't sterilize seeds. You want that seed to germinate and the microbes that it carries with it to hop off the seed and to do what it needs to be doing, multiplying in the soil. You want to be able to encourage the fungi so that you get this mycorrhizal fungi situation. You want to be able to use mulches to attract either fungi or bacteria or a balance between the two, because it turns out that things that are in the ground for less than a year really appreciate a soil that has more bacteria than fungi. And things that are in the ground for more than a year, they like more fungi than bacteria. So you're able to adjust it using different kinds of mulches. This is really an approach to gardening that is brand new, but when you think about it, it's very old as well. It goes back to practices before World War I, World War II, even before Dr. Howard or Al. It's just whew, these things are incredible, and we as gardeners tend to think we're more sensible and more efficient than the plant. This plant has been evolving for thousands of years to do what it does.
Let's talk about that. So I think we see the plant as a couple of things. We see the plant as kind of a parasite that
Right.
needs all these inputs. And we see the plant as passive, but I think both of those, the opposite of both of those is true. The plant is active and the plant adds to the soil. The plant enriches the soil, right?
Right, absolutely. If you follow the law of return, it certainly does. And if you plant things like cover crops, it certainly will as well. And some plants have the ability to be able to attract neighbors or to keep other neighbors away from themselves, so that there's kind of a nice symbiotic situation. It's really a beautiful, beautiful situation. It's like geometry, and the more you understand it, the more you're able to think things through as you're working, and as you're out there gardening, and you begin to team with microbes yourself, and you become a partner with a plant that is teaming with the microbes.
So do plants compete or cooperate?
I say some compete and some cooperate. Certain plants will ensure that their neighbors stay a proper distance away from them so that they both can eat. Some plants will literally kill another plant. And all of this stuff involves not just the plant, but the microbes on the plant. One of the things I remember Dr. White telling me about was a patent which is for being developed, or maybe it has already been applied for a microbe that sits on the grass plant, jumps off the plant and kills the dandelion, jumps back on the plant again. Wow. That's the kind of soil food web teaming I want to have. So there's some really exciting stuff that is beginning to happen, and all of the so-called, if you want to use this term, bad guys, the Monsantos and Bayers that are using chemicals and all the stuff and developing things that need GMO. They're looking into these various kinds of bacteria, and it's really just a question of being able to identify some that help. And there have been several that are already available, particularly to the farming community, that are now beginning to trickle down into the gardening world. And you're beginning to be able to see some of these things at nurseries. But again, it's a brand new area that requires expensive science to figure it out, and to figure out how to package it so that it's alive and living or viable for you and me. Not easy to do. But it's important to do, because if we continue to treat the soil the way we are, using by and large chemicals and rototilling on a mass basis on the corporate farms and agriculture, we're going to end up in a world of hurt, in a bigger world of hurt, I should say.
So your father was used fertilizers and tillage and things like that. What if you could transport back in time 50 years or so and talk to your father about what you know now? What would you say?
Well, it's interesting because about 3/4 of the way through his gardening life, he started reading, as everybody who was into gardening, Rodale, Farming and Garden, and we had Rodale at the house. And he would, don't spray your orchards anymore. And so my father became quasi-organic. But if you go through those old organic magazines, you don't see the words bacteria or fungi mentioned in a positive sense. And so he would open his eyes up, he would throw away his sterilizer, and he would rejoice that he no longer had to walk behind the world's largest and oldest rototiller anybody had ever seen, which is what he used to do all the time. So yeah, he would have loved it. this stuff is important. It's not because I discovered it, because I didn't. Dr. Elaine, Dr. James White, these people deserve the Nobel Prize. And all I did was report what these people have discovered. And what everybody who's listening to this should be doing is utilizing this material and improving upon it. And it's going to be getting better and better and better. I'll give you 2 examples. For years, I could never figure out, how can I really tell people that their products, because people would send me stuff to try, was teeming with microbes or not. And then somebody invented, she just passed away, a product called the microbiometer, where you can now, using your cell phone, literally test your soil in 10 minutes for about $5 or $10 and determine the fungal bacteria ratio, pH, all sorts of stuff. Very important stuff. But what's really important about it is that cell phone, because I'm convinced we're going to be getting into the situation where we can do so many things for gardening with that cell phone. In teaming with bacteria, I've identified any number of special kinds of bacteria that help one plant or another. But how do you and I know which those bacteria might be? How do we know whether that's in our soil? How do we have any idea what kind of bacteria is in our soil? Well, when I wrote the book 3 years ago, it takes a long time. It just came out in September, but it takes a long time to, get up to publication. I made the prediction that there would be processes where you and I would be able to send in a sample of soil. Eventually, we'd be able to use our cell phone. Well, we're not at the cell phone zone yet, but we can send in our sample of soils to companies now, and they'll tell us, they can take the whole sample of soil, do a DNA test, and tell us all of the functional bacteria that are in there. Oh, we're almost there. So there's citizen science to be done, in combination with maybe corporate science as well, but it's going to make gardening so much more accurate, and probably not so important in gardening, because we have fun whether or not we're being accurate in terms of which bacteria our compost is supplying. But when it comes to mass agriculture, wow, to be able to say, okay, we don't have to use fertilizer for phosphorus at all, or we only need to use 20% of what we were using. Whew. These are important things.
What's the next step on that? There's the Haney test, and then you're talking about a microbiometer. I looked up microbiometers, and they're like $200, $250, but you're talking about something, a $5 or $10 thing you can get with your cell phone?
What happens is that $150 or $200 microbiometer, you get 10 or 15 tests off it.
Okay.
So you can go and you can do them right there in the field. So what I was doing was, people were sending me their product. I'd plant stuff. I'd take a microbiometer reading, and then 3, 4, 5, depending on what the product was, I'd take another one. Weeks later, I'd take another one. Was there a higher microbiometer reading or not? Did it go down?
So what's it measuring?
It's measuring the microbiomass, the biomass of the microbes in your soil, which correlates with the nitrogen content of the soil and the carbon content of the soil. So a higher microbiomass means you don't have to fertilize. A low one means you do. And when I say fertilize, I should really be saying feed the microbes.
Yeah. With compost, with living compost, with good compost.
Or mulch. And there are several products that, there's on the West Coast. I don't know if you've got it on the East Coast. We've got a company called Down to Earth. It sells a living microbes, a box of stuff that's called living soil or living microbes, I think it's called. And there are lots of places that are selling stuff with microbes in it. There's lots of mycorrhizae soil, which is really not the proper term. Mycorrhizae is the relationship. Mycorrhizal fungi can be found in many different kinds of mixes now. You can buy mycorrhizal fungi itself, and they work. This is great stuff. It's really
so. I've heard that one thing that's recommended is to try to find relatively mature forest in your area, get a handful of it, put that in your compost?
It doesn't hurt. There's no question you are supplying some new microbes. I don't know how many there would be. It certainly can't hurt from my perspective. Now there may be people say, "Yeah, you're introducing diseases." I don't think so. Not from a healthy forest.
Mhm.
What's more important, I think, is that you get the indigenous microbes from your property. So I'm not really a big fan of those turnable composters. I like my composting stuff to touch the ground. Let the worms move up through it, let
Mm,
microbes move up and
right,
down. Yeah, I
right,
like that. That's
right.
kind of how I like it. I guess sort of a corollary question would be, is it a bad idea to bring in a bag of compost from Alaska? There's some Alaska humus to plant down in your compost pile. I don't think so. If you're composting properly and your
Yeah.
compost is going through the system, not all compost does. You're turning your pile enough times so that the outside is getting composted as well. You're in good shape. You're in good shape.
So Dr. Elaine talks about diversity, diversity, diversity. So I'm just thinking about how do you achieve that diversity in your compost? So, last year I had some good luck mixing wood chips and grass clippings. You get your green and your brown. And then I don't know how to take that and make it more diverse.
Sure. Well, you can add in the detritus that comes down from your trees, limbs, chippings, wood chips, which contain a slightly different. They need a different kind of fungi and bacteria to break down. You can put in different kinds of what I call flower material. So, for example, if you're in an area where there are lots of blueberries, go get the spent stuff from the making of the blueberries. Where you live, go get the mint from the mint juleps. I don't know. I don't know what you're using down there, but and it's very important to have fun and to laugh as you're gardening. I might
Yeah.
add.
Okay. So a couple of things
Microbes are
about,
happy.
huh?
Microbes are happy.
Yeah, of course. They're having a riot.
Well, and you're putting your hands in some microbes that are
Mhm.
producing substances, that are making you a little bit high, making you a little bit more intelligent. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
I've heard that, let me see, what was I going to say?
I don't know.
I know. One thing that would be really great is if our local communities could kind of come together. It could, everybody's doing compost, so you come together and you swap compost samples just like you would swap seeds or plants. Is that a
Yeah.
good idea?
Yeah, probably not a bad idea at all. It's very important that towns do, communities try to do mass composting. Even that will probably increase the diversity of people bringing leaves in from all around the town. Yeah, you can put straw. There's all sorts of different things that you can be doing. Straw introduces tremendous numbers of parameciums, and you can put compost tea. You can make a compost tea using someone's compost tea mix and put that in your compost. There's lots of different ways you can make your compost better. But I'm betting your compost, once it goes through the process, is pretty good, no matter what you put in it, and has pretty high diversity, no matter what you put in it. Now, we're fortunate in Alaska, we have some real high diversity soils. So you can find them. We used to sell it from here pre-pandemic, but you can find good soils, and when you find good soils, you can throw some of that in your compost as well.
Okay, so one couple of last questions. One is, tell me about your garden. What are you excited about growing last year and this year?
Well, what do I like? This year, I'm going to completely change the way I garden. I'm going to grow everything in containers, everything. It just makes it easier, and not just for me, but for whoever takes over the property when I'm someplace giving a lecture. My poor house sitter or my wife has to take care of these. My wife does most of the gardening. Don't get me wrong, but I'm really enamored with different planting systems these days. And so I used corrugated sewer pipe to plant my sweet peas in. I'm going to do, some guttering, maybe even make a little quasi hydroponic guttering system. We here in Alaska are addicted to a couple of things. One is you got to grow a tomato. It's the holy, it's the holy grail.
Yeah.
We went through, and so people have outdoor greenhouses. We tend not to have too many temperature days above 55 degrees at night, and so we use greenhouses. The sweet peas, flower wise, are phenomenal here. All our flowers are just the annuals, just absolutely terrific. And I'm going to try to put some grasses in my lawn without having to dig up the whole lawn. In order to get a really nice lawn, a wildflower lawn, basically you got to rototill the lawn up and get rid of all the grasses and put in wildflowers and stuff. Well, I just want grasses. I want to be able to walk around through different grass paths. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to plant a lot of those in container, put them in different places of the garden, use different mycorrhizal fungi, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I do. I putter around, but mostly I'm waiting for those tomatoes.
Right. So any parting thoughts or words of wisdom? Anything you haven't been able to say yet that's on your mind?
Yeah, plant a row for the hungry. It's very important if you're a gardener or if you're a farmer, you got to have one row that you take to someone that needs it, either a food bank, church, synagogue, someplace, mosque, wherever, even just a neighbor. Nothing slips between the lip and the cup. You do it. There's no governmental funds, no administrative costs, and it'll make you feel a lot better. But if it makes you feel better, can you imagine how it makes the person that gets that food? Wow. So that's my parting thought.
Fantastic. My guest has been Jeff Lowenfels, author of the 4-book series Teaming with Microbes, Teaming with Nutrients, Teaming with Fungi, and Teaming with Bacteria. It's all about the soil food web. The soil food web is so important. I've been a climate reporter for 4 years, and my entire journey has led me to soil and the nutrients that it produces and the infiltrating the water into the ground. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. And where can people get your books?
Well, they can get them anywhere books are sold. Amazon clearly has them. Barnes and Nobles, and particularly if it's in a town that I've been to, because I always go into those stores, and if they don't have my book, I order 4 or 5. So there should be some there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff.
Sure. Been fun. Thank you.